Senator Ardern.
Mr Speaker, it's my pleasure to speak on the second reading of the Social Security Long-Term Residential Care budget measures. And I was listening to the contribution made by the National Party member, and of course he was speculating over some of the impact that this bill might have, these change in asset thresholds. And I guess the key word there is speculating, because we really don't know, Mr Speaker, because this bill is not going to go through the rigorous process that we would usually in this Parliament expect a piece of legislation to go through. Now, we do tend to use urgency, I think, often unwisely in this House, and I think this is a prime case for that. I understand when we're talking about excise, when we're talking about things that might cause a run on the liquor stores where you may have reason for extraordinary urgency, but this is not one of those cases. So I really challenge the Minister during committee stages to share with us why it is that this was determined to be of such urgency that we denied the people of New Zealand the ability to have their say, Mr Speaker. So I look forward to hearing the Minister's contribution on that, because I know on this side of the House we would have appreciated the opportunity to speak with members of the public about the impact that this change would have on them, and also with the likes of groups such as Grey Power and Aged Concern, who represent the interests of the groups of the people, the elderly, who will be affected by these changes. I'm also interested from the government side for their motivation in this change, because I don't think that's come across with enough clarity. Is it an issue of sustainability, or is it an issue of revenue? I see these as being two distinct things. Now, most of the changes we've debated in this House to date, since the budget was read yesterday, have been under the proviso of revenue-gathering exercises or savings. Now, if that is indeed the case, and this is the best we can do, that is somewhat worrying. But secondly, and we would suggest that it's still time for the government to consider a capital gains tax, but secondly, if it is an issue of sustainability, then I think that that's an incredibly interesting point, because the impact that this will have will be very direct for the individuals it affects, but in terms of the wider fiscal spend, nominal, compared, for instance, to the impact of superannuation. Now, I shouldn't need to tell the government this, because it's set out in plain language in the Vote Social Development estimates. In fact, it states from the Ministry of Social Development, New Zealand superannuation accounted for 55% of total expenditure on benefits in 2007 and 8, and fell to nearly 52%. This ratio is at 55% in the current year and is estimated to rise to 60% by 2015-16. Now, 60%, that might seem meaningless. But when you factor in that within 3 years, the amount we spend on superannuation alone will be equivalent to almost the entire education budget, then we're starting to talk about a significant spend. So if we want to talk about sustainability in this House, we need to start getting real about the impact that our superannuation spend is having, not just on social development, but on the New Zealand economy generally. In fact, by 2015, according to the long-term fiscal treasury output, which of course they're required to provide, I believe, every 5 years, by 2050, over $200 billion will be the amount of the shortfall. That is more than New Zealand's entire GDP. Even Treasury is supporting a lift in the age of superannuation. It is completely disingenuous for that side of the House to try and maintain a line that we don't need to look at this issue. We absolutely do, and this is classic avoidance. This bill represents classic avoidance. In fact, Bill English himself admits that something needs to happen in this area, which puts him at odds with the Prime Minister when it comes to the age of eligibility for superannuation. In fact, it's widely known that the Prime Minister comments privately that the position is probably unsustainable, but because he has made a political commitment, he is unwilling to address that. That is not leadership. In my mind, that is not leadership. These are the hard issues and the issues that this budget has chosen to avoid, and the result of that is this bill. This bill is a direct result of avoidance from that government around the most significant issues. I even just this morning heard a government minister, in fact, state that the Retirement Commissioner said that this is really going to bite in 2020, so we don't need to worry about it now. We don't need to worry about it now. Again, I see that as a failure of leadership. The reason we need to debate this now is because for all of those who are under the age of 45, that may not include many people in this House, but for all of those who are under the age of 45, they deserve to know that there will be changes coming. They deserve to know that the system will be sustainable, and they deserve, for instance, to have the knowledge in order to be investing in their own retirement funds, because that's what we're going to need in the future, is a real mixture of personal savings as well as superannuation. But the sad fact is that most of the people my age, when surveyed by the Retirement Commissioner, didn't believe that universal super would be available to them when they retired. And no wonder, when you see classic avoidance in this House to deal with the sustainability of superannuation. We need to address it. I also think the reason we need to address it is because we need to start looking at ways to cushion any change on our most vulnerable. I do believe it's necessary that if we see a lift in the retirement age, those who are working, and particularly on low-wage, low-skilled but hard-working environments that mean that it would be physically impossible for them to continue beyond a certain age, we need to make sure we cushion that we have the necessary policy in place that allows them to retire at a time that is fair and equitable. We need time to develop those policies and those ideas, and that is what we should be debating in this House, not this threshold change that we're debating today. But also, I think one of the reasons the government's unwilling to bring up this debate is because it would highlight the contradictions in what they're doing currently. Right. In fact, if this really is about sustainability for people when they retire, delaying auto-enrolment, delaying the urgency around people's personal savings, which we know is crucial, given the outlook for the Treasury books, seems utterly bizarre to me. Our personal savings are shallow. They are shallow. And that has a flow-on effect for our wider economy. But instead of encouraging further personal savings, this is another thing that this government, for political expediency, has decided to just waylay. And we cannot do that forever. But where is all of this coming from then? You know, I mean, this idea, though, that all of this should be loaded onto future generations. It's not just in super policy. It's not just around superannuation. The intergenerational inequity that this government feels perfectly content to load on to the next generation of voters extends beyond super. Where else does it go to? Well, we could name a few on this side. Asset sales. Selling off future revenue gathering. I'm still going. I'm sorry, Mr. Calder. I haven't finished. We're selling off our assets, a future source of revenue for the next generation. What about student allowances? I will listen intently to you when you do get to your feet, but if you wouldn't mind, I want to use these 2 minutes. Secondly, student allowances. Student allowances, we've now removed, in Mr. Joyce's wisdom, the ability for anyone at postgraduate level to gain a student allowance in order to allow them to contribute to our economy. This bill delays the bigger issues, and instead of dealing with them, we are offloading it onto the future generations. Now, it's easy for that government to talk in general terms about policy like this, but what about some real examples? I know a graduate at the moment who's studying towards helping those with learning disabilities, deaf children to learn in the classroom. She will not be able to complete her studies as a consequence of Mr. Joyce's grand plan to remove student allowances. And I haven't even started on the freeze on ECE funding and, of course, the classic paperboy tax credit, which will become emblematic of this budget, and how emblematic of this budget and that government's refusal to address the big issues, and that is why this is a nickel and dime budget.
Dr. Kim Calder.
It's timely in view of the